Hello, my dear friends. You're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 15th of September of 2025. Today we have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And very interesting updates we continue receiving from the territory of the Republic of Belarus, where the military drills of West 2025 continues. US military officers pay a surprise visit to Belarus to observe Zapad 2025 military drills, the joint Russian-Belarusian military exercises. So this is exactly the moment that was published by the Minister of Defense of the Republic of Belarus. The Russian-Belarusian military exercises are being monitored by 16 military diplomatic missions of foreign countries, including the United States of America, Turkey, and Hungary. So, the Minister of Defense of the Republic of Belarus showed footage of a meeting between American officers and the Minister of Defense of Belarus. So, this is very important piece of news that shows that the Western countries, the United States of America more precisely, are trying to make relations between the United States of America, the Russian Federation, and Belarus better. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, we got additional videos and footage of how exactly the drills were carried out by Russians and Belarusians. Lots of exercises were carried out on the rivers, in fields, with motorcycles, with Iskander missiles, and many, many other different tools and weapons, modern tools and weapons. At the same time, the European countries are trying to not to be behind the situation. Today we got report that the Polish President Karol Nawrocki has signed a resolution approving the presence of foreign troops from NATO member states in the country. Poland's National Security Bureau reported on Sunday. So the Western countries are doing their best with the purpose to stabilize the situation and to protect the territory of the European Union, especially the territory of the Baltic states, because obviously these military drills are not against NATO. These military drills, of course, for security and defense of the Belarus and the Russian Federation. But obviously, these drills can be considered as drills against the Baltic states because if war happens between NATO and the Russian Federation, obviously the Baltic states are going to be the first target for the Russians. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first, let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction where the Russians continue their offensive operation. Now it's clear that indeed the Zaporizhzhia offensive operation is the main offensive operation carried out by Russians in 2025, in autumn of 2025 at least. And according to information we have during the previous 24 hours, the armed forces of the Russian Federation took under control another village, and we are talking about the settlement by the name of Olgovskaya. This video was published today by the Group of Forces East, and according to this video, we can see how Russians of the Fifth Army were taking under control positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in this direction. And in the final part of the video, we can see how a Russian soldier raised the Russian flag in the most northwestern part of the settlement. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map. Furthermore, I would like to remind you that currently, according to information we have, there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Berezova. The Russians have already answered the village from the north. The Russians answered the village from the east and from the south. Most likely tomorrow, the settlement would be taken by the Russians completely, and the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back further in the western direction. And furthermore, during the day, we got first videos from the area of the village of Kalinovskaya, which is the next village after the settlement of Berezova. Here we can see how the Russians have already begun artillery preparation. So, which means that most likely by the end of this week, the Russians will take under control both the villages of Berezova and the village of Kalinovsk, and the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back even further towards the settlement of Verbova. So now we can say that the front line of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area collapsed. The Ukrainians can't stabilize the situation. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. Now let's move further and let's continue our discussion of the western direction of Donetsk region. Today we got additional updates that the Russians indeed restored control over the villages of Andreevka, Klivtsova, and the settlement of Zeleny Gai. So no doubts that the Russians recaptured these territories, but this report and this update is not the most important. The most important is the report and the update that was published by pro-Ukraine resource of Deep State. Here we can see that, according to pro-Ukraine resources, the Russians during the previous several days managed to counterattack. They restore control over the village of Zelenogaya and Rivka Klivtsova. And furthermore, the Russians, as a result of this counteroffensive operation, managed to answer the southeastern part of the village of Ivanovka. So if we take a look closer to the update that was provided by pro-Ukraine resources, this update covers not that the territory to the south of the river of Vovcha, but this update covers the most southeastern part of the settlement of Ivanovka. So probably 10 buildings, up to 10 buildings were captured by the Russians on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha. This is very important and this is unexpected. This is something that Ukrainians didn't expect. The Ukrainians thought that the river of Volcha would be something like a natural barrier before Russian further offensive. Furthermore, the Ukrainians supposed that the Russians would continue their offensive along the river of Volcha from the eastern direction in the western direction. And the Russians will continue this offensive. They're not going to stop this. But now we see that the Russians decided to secure the most western part of the Donetsk region with crossing the river of Volcha and beginning offensive operation in the village of Ivanovka itself. Currently, there are very heavy clashes. Most likely, the Ukrainians didn't expect this offensive, so that is why now they're focused on bringing additional forces in unions in this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation. But if Russians somehow are able to take under control the village of Ivanovka on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha, and let's say to take under complete control these territories between the village of Ivanovka and the village of Filia, this will lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha, because from this foothold, the Russians will have possibilities to attack in the direction of Novopavlovka, to outflank the settlement and to attack Ukrainians from behind. The Russians from these positions will be able to move further in the northern direction towards the city of Mizhova. And the Russians, of course, from this area would be able to attack the settlement of Malomikhailovka and Gavrilovka from the north and from the northeast. So this is a very dangerous situation for Ukraine if they don't stabilize the situation, if they don't force the Russians to fall back from this area. This can lead to completely unpredictable consequences for the armed force of Ukraine, because this area is the most unprotected area of the armed force of Ukraine in this direction. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Currently, there are very heavy clashes between Russians and the Ukrainians, but it seems that something has been changed. That something changed, and now we see that we are about to answer the situation when either the Russians or the Ukrainians will take the initiative in their hands, and then the situation will develop just in one side, either in the Russian favor or in the Ukrainian favor. As of the 15th of September of 2025, both the Russians and the Ukrainians published report that they managed to achieve significant results along the line of combat contact exactly in the area of the Dobropolye breakthrough. The Ukrainians are saying, more precisely, the units of the 1st Corps of National Guard reported today that as a result of counter-offensive operation, the Ukrainians managed to restore complete control over the village by the name of Pankovka. So according to Ukrainian sources, this strategical village was retaken by the Ukrainians by the end of the 15th of September of 2025. As of now, we're not going to change the map. We're waiting for more reliable proofs. Probably we're waiting for mappers. We're waiting for geolocations. But we got one video from the southern part of the village of Vladimirovka. This video was published by pro-Ukrainian resources, and here we can see how Russians were attacking the settlement of Vladimirovka with 4 bikers. But the problem is that the Russians just answered the village and they were ambushed immediately, and the entire storm group was destroyed. So the Russians answered the village in this point, they landed in this area, and they were attacked by Ukrainians immediately. This video confirms that this part of Volodymyrovka is also under complete Ukrainian control. But at the same time, due to the fact that the Russians answered the village losing these roads of attack, we believe that these 3 lines and these fields are under complete control of the armed force of the Russian Federation, and these fields are in the gray zone. So this is the current status and the current situation in this area. At the same time, lots of pro-Russian, very reliable resources adjusted their maps again, showing that the Russians haven't been forced to fall back from the area of breakthrough, but at the other side, on the other hand, the Russians improved their positions. So, pro-Russian resources reported that during the previous 24 hours, as a result of offensive operation, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to take under control the south or eastern part of the settlement of Novodonbass. So this is how exactly the map been changed during the previous 24 hours. So these territories were taken and the Russians answered the settlement. Furthermore, pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to restore positions on the territory of the village by the name of Zolotoy Kolodez. So currently up to 50% of the settlement is already under complete Russian control and currently there are very heavy clashes. Furthermore, the same pro-Russian resources reported that the Russians once again answered the village of Gruske from the south, and the Russians managed to outflank the settlement from the east and to cut the settlement from supplying support from the eastern direction. So this is what the pro-Russian resources shown us today. So as you can see, both Ukrainians and Russians are showing us completely different picture. The Ukrainians continue their counter-offensive with the purpose to cut the area of breakthrough. At the same time, we continue receiving reports that the Russians are trying to dig in deeper along the second line of defense and to create the flower of Dobropolye or something like this. As of now, it's very difficult to understand who is lying or who is telling the truth, but one thing I know for sure that we are entering the period of time when this situation will be finished and then we're going to understand and the entire and real picture will be revealed both by the Russians and Ukrainians and then we will understand what exactly is happening. The major battle, the general battle of 2025 is entering the phase when everything will become clear and when we're going to understand what is going to happen next. As for the city of Pokrovsk itself, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians resumed their heavy bombardments of the city. The Russians were bombing the city in the central part, in the southern parts, to the west of the city. Lots of explosions and lots of attacks carried out by Russian aviation were recorded, which means that the Russians are about to begin another wave of offensive operation with the purpose to improve their positions on the territory of the city of Pokrovsk once again. I would like to remind you that according to several pro-Western reporters, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over the central part of the city. We haven't adjusted the map, but who knows what exactly is happening there. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Siversk direction. During the previous 24 hours, probably the most important updates came from this area. As you can see, we got lots of icons and most of them are concentrated and focused between two cities, the city of Liman and the city of Siversk. So the main activity took place exactly in this area. So what is happening here? So this is probably one of the most important video that describes the real situation on the ground. Here we can see that almost 50% of the city of Yampol, of the town of Yampol, is covered with fire, which means that currently there are very heavy clashes. And most likely, this is not just a picture. This is consequences. This is consequences of Russian artillery preparation. So the entire eastern northeastern part was almost destroyed by Russians. Furthermore, we have a lots of geolocations of how Russians were attacking Ukrainian vehicles that were trying to enter the central and the northeastern part of the settlement with the purpose to bring additional reinforcements and reserves, but Russians were hunting and destroying them. Furthermore, a bit further to the west of the city of the town of Lyambel, the Russians continue hunting and destroying Ukrainian FPV drone positions with the purpose not to allow them to send drones towards the settlement of Yampol with the purpose to stabilize the situation. And now the most important update. And the most important update was published by pro-Ukrainian resources of Deep State. Today, they adjusted the gray zone in this area, uh, giving additional territories to the area of no one's land. So as you can see, according to this map, Up to 20 or 15% of the settlement of Yampol is already either in the gray zone or in contested area. So according to this report, we can make a conclusion that Russians made first attempt to answer the settlement of Yampol and to take under complete control its northeastern part. So currently there are very heavy clashes exactly for this area, for the area that is covered with this very, very huge fire. The Russians are trying to break through Ukrainian defense. And obviously, if the Russians are able to establish complete control over the settlement of Yampol and to force Ukrainians to fall back, if Russians are able to improve their positions like this, then the Russians will be able to completely destroy Ukrainian defense between the cities of Liman and Siversk. Furthermore, from these positions, the Russians will be able to establish complete FPV drone control over the main supply lines that go in the direction of the city of Siversk. The fall of the city of Yampol is going to be the beginning of the battle for the city of Siversk. As for the northern directions, during the previous 24 hours, additional changes were recorded on the territory of the city of Kupyansk. The Russians continue advancing. The Ukrainians are in panic, publishing a lot of updates that they have already lost the battle of the city, that they haven't managed to prepare defense, and it seems that in very coming soon days, the battle of the Kupyansk will be finished, obviously also during the autumn military campaign. And that's it for today. Military with Summary channel reminds to we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.